Okay, so again, welcome to this Yellowdig webinar. My name is Shaunak Roy. I'm the founder and CEO of Yellowdig. I'm excited to host this webinar with a few very prominent and very knowledgeable participants who have joined me as panelists for this webinar today. I'm going to introduce them very shortly. But everybody who is joining this webinar, welcome. And I hope that this is going to be an exciting and interesting discussion for you all. I would love you to get involved. So definitely look at your Q&A section of this Zoom meeting and see that if you can post your questions. We are going to take questions as we move forward. With that, let me first introduce two of our panelists today. So we have Dr. Mark Milliron, who has joined us, and I'm going to introduce Mark, and then we have Rob Cohen, who has also joined us. Very briefly about Mark. Mark is currently the Senior Vice President and Executive Dean of the Teachers College at the Western Governors University. Mark has, I know that many of you know Mark because I have been getting some private messages from people who are excited to hear from him. So I'm glad, I hope that you could join and hear him speak about some of the topics that we are excited about. So Mark has decades of experience in education. He's one of those thought leaders I have been following for a long time. And he recently joined us as an advisor for the company. He is not only an academic, but he is also an entrepreneur. He was one of the co-founders of Civitas Learning, where he was the chief learning officer for a while, and then kind of really took the company from early conception to a much larger scale. He's on over a dozen boards, Mark. I always forget how many. You are a very busy man, so you're in many, many boards. And I'll let you speak about that and intimately familiar with some of the topics that we're going to discuss today. And then before I kind of pass it on to you to kind of tell a little more, maybe also introduce Rob Cohen, who is also one of our advisors. He also recently joined us in our advisory board. Rob is the co-founder and I think one of the early, the co-founding CFO of 2U, which later he became, I think, president and COO, Rob. So you kind of served those roles and helped 2U, which is, we all know about that company. It's an iconic company in education, from a very early stage to a much bigger company, which is today, where he is currently a senior advisor. Rob also has decades of experience in education as an entrepreneur, as well as starting iconic companies like 2U, as well as advising young companies to grow and scale in this space. So I'm very excited to have Rob also join us in this conversation. Before I get started, I just wanted to kind of have Mark and Rob share a little bit about their backgrounds, but also I have a question for both of them, which is, both of them have spent almost a couple of decades, if not more, in education. And I'm guessing there is something personal, which is driving them, to you to be involved. If you can share a little bit about your personal story, what got you excited to spend your life into education, I think our viewers and listeners will appreciate that. So with that, I'm passing on to Mark. Take it over from here.
Yeah, my passion for education is definitely personal. I come from a family of 9 kids. I actually have an African-American brother, Native American brother, and a Korean sister. In addition to that, we had 25 foster kids who rotated through my house during the time I was growing up. My mom was a special needs nurse and my dad was out of his mind. So we had a big, rowdy, crazy household. But I was the first one in my family to go on a higher ed journey. And I jokingly say when I walked onto the campus of Mesa Community College, I didn't know what an AA was. I didn't know what an AS was. I kind of knew what BS was, right? Because I was totally faking it. And for me, it really was a matter of serendipity. The right people showed up at the right time to help a lost soul kind of find their way. And in many ways, part of what I'm trying to do with my career, what I've always tried to do with my career, is give back, because that pathway to possibility that happened with Mesa Community College on to Arizona State, 2 degrees, and then a doctorate at UT Austin, all happened because passionate and caring individuals showed up at the right time in the right way with the right kind of resource. It wasn't definitely not a straight shot. It was a lot of rocky journey along the way. One of the things I've always tried to do is figure out how can we do work in the world of education to open up that access pathway to possibility, to actually help more and more diverse students be more successful than ever before. And that's one of the reasons why I've been passionate around ed tech. It's why I've been passionate around new models. It's why I've been passionate around data, because I'm a firm believer in the notion you have to be able to see students to be able to serve them. So this isn't about one size fits all. This is about having the ability to be able to connect with students where they are and take them where they need to go in a way that makes sense for them. And we can unpack that a little bit more beyond that. But if you look at the through line of all of my affiliations on the boards and the nonprofits and foundation work I do and the work connected, and then all the career choices I've made, which have been a lot, which is a kind way of saying I can't keep a job. I'm always committed to trying to help more and more students be more successful on these education pathways and to be with innovators who are trying to do the same thing, which is why I love being on panels with folks like Rob and yourself. I love being involved with organizations that care about this kind of work. That's what I like to be all about.
What a great story, Mark. Rob.
Mark, your comment about lost souls resonated with me. I don't know if I was ever a lost soul, but the people around me who gave me a chance to partner with them and learn from them definitely contributed to my success, and I really appreciate that. I've done EdTech exclusively for those decades that Shaunak was talking about. I've done it exclusively for nearly 40 years. I started in EdTech in the best place, which to me is in the classroom, because that's where it starts with teachers and students and the learning. I was one of the first students ever as part of a company called the Princeton Review. I took an SAT class while in high school and really gelled with the founder. I began working for him while I was in high school, literally writing materials, teaching, talking to parents about how our SAT prep was going to help high school students while a high school student. So it goes back to my beginnings. When I was in college, I started one of the first Princeton Review franchises while a college student. And I tutored, I taught, I trained teachers for over 15 years. So while I spent a lot of time on the business side of education, I started in the classroom teaching and thinking about how students learn. And that goes into all of my business decisions. So I've been lucky to have done nothing but education, which is one of, I think, the noblest professions. And I appreciate being here today to share with you and everyone else.
Thank you, Rob. What a fantastic story. I mean, it is, such a blessing for us to kind of have people like you to kind of really, help us guide through the process as we build the technologies to help our educators and our students. Myself, very quickly, and I'm the founder of CEO of Yellowdig. My journey in education has been, I would almost say, accidental, because, I was in the corporate ladder, right, climbing and, going through my corporate jobs. Then one day I kind of decided to start a company, and I said, okay, if I want to start a company, I'd rather do something which I'm passionate about. And when I kind of went through my list of things that I'm passionate about, I say, I really truly enjoy learning. So how can I build a company which fundamentally I'm trying to kind of figure out how people learn and how we can make this happen at scale. So I'm excited to have both of you today, and I'm looking forward for this conversation. With that, let's go through the topics that we're going to discuss today. So, with a group like this, I think we can talk anything and everything about higher education. But today, we have selected one topic which we think is going to be meaningful and valuable to our audience and our user base, which is around social, emotional, and experiential learning. And I was sharing a little bit in the earlier part of this webinar. As we get through the pandemic, one of the things that are coming up again and again is the mental well-being of our students. Inside Higher Education did a study about like 6 to 9 months back when they reached out to the students and said, hey, what are the problems that you're having? Over 70% students reported that they feel more and more disconnected from their peer group, which is a problem, right? Of course, we are living in this Zoom world or hybrid or whatever new world we are living in, but our students getting disconnected with one another has a lot of downstream problems, and we need to kind of make sure that we do everything and anything we can do to kind of prevent that. So which we thought that this is an important topic for us to get into. So this is what we are going to spend the next 45 minutes to talk about. Then we are also going to talk a little bit about something that I recently learned from Mark, is how to design healthy learning environments. And Mark, I know you've done a bunch of work in this area, so we would love to hear from you. How you think about it, what are the components of it, and we will dig into a little bit like how do we make it work and actually actionable in the learning environments. And finally, we are going to spend some time, and especially Rob, which is where it'll be great for you to kind of talk about, is how do we scale learning innovation? It's great for us to, of course, innovate in the classroom, but we need to scale those innovations for us to have the maximum impact we can make. And we all know it's not easy sometimes. We have a bunch of challenges, we have budget challenges, we have change management challenges. So how do we really work through that to effectively scale learning is another topic we are going to get through today. And from my side, I'm going to make a few comments and I'm going to ask questions to our panelists. But I would love to our listeners to actually post questions that myself, and we have Gaib who's going to help me read out to both Mark and Rob. So if you have a question which is relevant to this topic, do post in our Q&A. We are going to get to that and we are going to ask those questions to our panelists. With that, I'm going to move on to our first slide. And this slide, this is something I selected based on a study I recently came across by the Center of Creative Leadership. What they did was something interesting. And this study came in 2015. So it's not super new. It's been around 5 years. But I think what was very interesting about it is it did some sizing around the impact of social learning and experiential learning. We all know the value of social and experiential learning, kind of the human connection and peer-to-peer learning, and how learning can be a lot more lively as opposed to just being in the receiving end. As educators, I think this has been around for a while. But what has been most curious to me was that if you look at actual innovation or education technologies or new learning practices, a lot of the innovation actually has happened in the formal instruction side of things. So for example, new technologies to provide, let's say, synchronous sessions or video technologies or assessment technologies, which actually is driven by the instructor to the students. There has been a lot of innovation in this space. Rightly so, because that's kind of the first aspect of innovation. But as we see here, there is a lot of value to be innovated in the social as well as experiential side of learning, which is what the study says. So one question I have, and I want to pose it to our panelists today, is if you were to do a similar chart, which kind of shows the innovation in each of these areas, I think it'll be flipped probably, right? I mean, a lot of innovation in the formal side, some amount of innovation in social, maybe a little bit in the experiential side. There's a lot of good work happening there, but not enough to really take full advantage of this opportunity that we have here. So Mark, maybe I'll start with you. What is social learning for you and experiential learning for you? And where do you see the current state of the world in terms of innovation that's going to drive the next generation of teaching practices or learning practices in these two domains?
Yeah, there is a lot of work done on social and emotional learning that is worth checking out. Probably if you registered for this webinar, you're probably already a fan and or connected to it. But if you haven't checked out University of Pennsylvania's work on social emotional teaching and learning, absolutely worth taking a look at. And also I would encourage you to look at people who are really diving into the affective domain in teaching and learning. Folks like George Siemens now at University of Texas, Arlington's Link Lab, but also Jane McGonigal at the Institute for the Future has done a lot of work on the notion of how even game-based learning, one of the reasons why it's so powerful is because of how it makes people feel, right? They feel almost joy and connection and excitement. And there are a lot of students who would tell you they don't feel a lot of joy and excitement and connection to some of the learning they're a part of. So a lot of this has to do with how people feel and connect to learning. And part of social emotional learning is being able to, again, like I said before, meet a student where they are, have a sense of emotional connection, but also importantly, almost an empathetic connection to be able to understand what their learning needs might be to help them kind of go where they're going to go. Shaunak, I've used for years this framework that is, when anybody I know is getting into digital learning, I tell them to always think about the 3 C's. Think about how you can use these digital tools to help make connections for students, right? If you look at Kate Patricia Cross did this wonderful webinar with the folks at the League for Innovation years ago, kind of doing a synthesis of brain research. And one of the things she said is, learning is always about making connections. And I'm just going to give you what I would argue the 3 big C's of the connections. You're trying to connect students to the best content humanly possible. And digital resources can absolutely help you do that. It can help you find it, connect to it, access it quickly and easily at low cost, high value. You want to use tools like Yellowdig, tools like your learning management system, tools like others to connect them to the best content possible. What's great is I don't care if you're in rural Appalachia or if you're in an inner city Baltimore, like anybody and everybody can have access to some of the best high quality content possible. And that used to be a differentiator of education, is whether or not you could access that content. Now it's pretty democratized. Second is not just content, it's context. Can a student unpack the relevance, the application, the utility of that learning, and understand sociology in the context of that community? Understand the whatever that curriculum topic is going to be, how it's actually used in practice. Everything from math to basic writing, all the way through history. When you see a context, you actually brings the learning to life. And the second is community. And that is where you're connecting students to each other. You're connecting them to the faculty member. You're connecting them to a world of learning beyond it, but you're connecting people to people in this, which actually gets into that emotional side and that human side, kind of intuitive side. So very simple thing is, can you use technology to connect students to the best content, context, and community? And what you see is the tools we have today, it used to be really indexed, and then you were just talking about this a few minutes ago, Shaunak, that we've really over-indexed on the formal and on the content. But now we actually have tools to connect students more to context, where we can bring things to life, even in virtual reality and augmented realities kind of settings. And we can connect them to community like never before. We can get peers connected. We can get small groups in a class connected. We can get people connected in learning communities globally with personal learning networks. And much more elegantly. I mean, think about how our kids play video games, where they get in these self-regulating and self-forming game communities, and in literally instance, they'll just suddenly get 30 people from around the world who all want to play the same game at the same time, and boom, they're connected and they're playing, a version of Minecraft or whatever else it's going to be. Our ability to use learning tools now to connect students to each other, either as near peers or as teachers themselves or as support systems, is probably more than ever before. So long way of answering your question, Shaunak, but I do like the simplicity of the 3 C's, because it gives faculty members, learning designers, something specifically to focus on. And it's all based on the brain research of connecting students to the best of things that can help them learn deeply, which is great content, context, and community.
Yeah, that's a wonderful framework, Mark. And one thing for our audience is we are going to include some of the sources, Mark, that you mentioned, who are doing it really well in our show notes, so that you are going to get those links. We're going to do some research on them as well and share it with you. One interesting story that was coming to my mind, Mark, as you were saying, the kids playing video games. You don't have to really stop them from. I have a 12-year-old, and literally every night is a fight for her to kind of put her phone down and go back to sleep. And she's playing games, but she's learning a lot. I sometimes feel that some of these games have evolved to be very learning oriented. I recently found, and she's trying to learn foreign languages, and she's actually learning Japanese a little bit. And she found a tool called Hello Talk, and something that I found from her. I mean, she just told me that this is what I'm using, where kids are actually teaching each other. So there are people who are native English speakers, and there are people from Japan who are native Japanese speakers, who are essentially correcting each other in real time on a chat app and teaching each other. So the interesting part is that the kids are already there, right? They're already kids, meaning students. I would say a lot of our older learners are also pretty tech advanced. So my question is, a follow-on question is, what needs to happen for our educators and the institutions to actually catch up to this new reality that some of our younger generation has already moved on to?
Well, I think it's, and by the way, I don't think it's just youth. I actually think, if you think about, like, one of the most powerful learning resources out there right now is YouTube, right? So if youth can help with this kind of stuff, I always tell a story about my son, Max. While I was on the road, my wife called me in a panic about our garbage disposal not working. And I was trying to walk her through it, push the button, do all the stuff she was supposed to do. She couldn't make it work. She's like, I'm just going to go to Home Depot and buy a new one. And my son, Max, who's 11 years old, is in the background yelling, put a stick in it, put a stick in it. I'm like, what are you talking about? And we stopped and we asked Max, what are you talking about? He said, I went on YouTube and I looked up that model and it said that the gears get stuck. And if you put your broom handle in, you can manually turn it and that'll get it started. And I'm like, okay. And like in the time my wife and I were talking, he got on YouTube, looked it up, watched the video, saw the demonstration, and then came back and reported it. And my wife's like, what do you think I should do? And I'm like, put a stick in it. I'm like, give it a try, see if it works. And sure enough, it did work. It got it going. But that's an example of a global learning community that's doing just-in-time learning. So part of this is for us as learning designers to realize that we can open our aperture a bit and realize there are learning resources all around from all different kinds of places. We need to do the work of curating and connecting those resources. And so part of what modern learning tools can allow us to do is curate and connect resources from all different kind of places. So I'm a big fan of open learning environments. Open education resources allow us to pull from publishers if you want, but then all kinds of other resources. And we in a learning community can be the curators of that, find that really good content and connect it to the learners in as close to real time as possible. And part of what our learners are going to have to do, by the way, and I'm sure Rob's going to be all over this in terms of like building this capacity, is we have to teach our learners how to be their own curators, their own connectors. So they're not only having it fed to them, they actually are able to go do this and find it themselves and then connect other people, which is part of the near peer work. And that's where social emotional learning comes to life, because suddenly you see people feel like they saw me, they connected me, I've built skill, and now I'm going to reach and teach and help other people. And you're building a true learning community. And one of the things you see is one of the biggest challenges for many students is they feel like they don't belong. And if they can have somebody else who looks like them, who's had their experience, reach out and connect, they can learn together and kind of move in that direction. And that's where we can engage in this larger dialogue. So part of it is really opening the aperture and realizing this kind of digital learning community is happening everywhere. It's happening in the world of work. It's happening in the world of just sports. If kids, when they want to learn things, they are going to figure it out online and then come to you and ask for your help in sorting through what's junk and what's real. So part of it is training kids and training adults, training each other to open our aperture and build the connection capacities around this and really figure out how we use the digital tools at our fingertips to do that curation, connection, and kind of catalytic role.
Yeah, that's just a quick thing I want to add. I like your daughter, I think it is natively true that the younger kids have figured out that learning is there whenever they need it. I find my children don't like to read textbooks, because why would I read a textbook when every bit of information in that textbook is going to be around me anytime I want it? You know, I can just look up the answer really quickly and assimilate it that way. But of course, not everyone learns the same way. Not everyone is social. Not everyone builds a community. So what we have to do as educators is take those students who are not going to build those learning communities. And clearly, those communities exist more than they did 50 years ago, because the technology allows students at 11:30 at night, everyone at home, to still study together, which couldn't have happened years before. But not everyone's going to be good at that. And tools like Yellowdig and like others that take those students who might be sitting back, who can watch some of this interactivity if they're not natively that way. But I believe they then get drawn in because they can become part of a community that they never would have if they were just sitting at home by themselves. So these tools are key.
I think that, the reductive notion of learning is I put up these readings, these interactivities, you take a test and I give you a grade is over. Yep. I just think it's over. And I think anybody who's still doing that is in trouble, because the generations of students who are coming through now have no patience for it, because they understand how broad this learning community actually is. We've got to, in fact, that's one of the reasons why I'm a big believer that competency-based, mastery-based learning is really taking off, because it gets that reductive kind of like formulaic industrial model out of there and makes us open the aperture and think broader about how we're going to do learning. Now, it's a lot messier, it's a lot more complicated, but it also raises the bar where we've got to show up with more of our A game, do more curation, more connection, and then really understand how we kind of define the learning outcomes. And guess what? Students have to show up. And that's a great part of social emotional learning. Part of the work is engaging them and challenging them to step up and do more and build this kind of capacity. And if we can do that, we can create learning environments that are more dynamic, more engaging, and more connected. But I do want to say, we can't assume that technology is what makes it engaging and dynamic, because I've seen faculty members who don't use a lick of technology who are amazing at doing what they do. It is really about learning design and designing learning in a way where you can do this. Now, truth be told, you can scale at a different level when you leverage technology, and you can reach kind of more people by doing that. But the real trick here is making sure you are opening your aperture and thinking differently about how you can create a learning environment for your students.
Yeah, no, amazing points. And I just say one last thing on this point before we move to the next topic is, the other part is data. And I know, Mark, you've done a lot of work in this area as well, which is with technology, we have access to a lot of data that otherwise we would not have access to, which can help us to design some of those experiences, and especially go after those students who are not engaging. Rob, to your point, and one thing we see in our data as well, as we kind of work with, hundreds and thousands of learners on a daily basis, a lot of learners who come to a community like Yellowdig to actually interact with their peer group, their initial behavior is actually just reading content. They're not there to kind of come and jump in and engage conversations, which typically is the first, like, 1/3 of the students who are, by default motivated in that subject area. So what we see is that initially they will start by reading content and kind of seeing examples with one another, which might motivate them or inspire them in some ways, and then slowly jumping in. Like, there is a slower path there, maybe first kind of viewing and then reacting and then initially commenting, and then gaining the confidence to actually share content with one another. So there is a path that we see, and I think that's the path of those learners who might otherwise may not get disengaged or drop out, to kind of come back and be part of that community. And
or who have been trained in the old way of doing it, and they don't know if you really want them to engage. Because a lot of learners, we throw out the term, okay, let's take the last 5 minutes for discussion, right? And they're used to that, and they know that in some ways that's kind of a throwaway line. That what you're really supposed to do is listen to the lecture, take your notes, and be ready to take your test, right? That's a different kind of learning environment. What a lot of those learners will do, in fact, some learners will actually buck when you make them engage, because they're used to the old model and they're used to running the play. Because, like, I've been very successful by the time I've gotten to college. I've been very successful running that play. So just give me what I paid for. Lecture to me and I'll take the test. And we've got to make sure we're engaging in a way where we're helping students understand the value of doing it in a broader way, because how they're going to learn for a lifetime. But when you look at the data, Shaunak, and this might help us transition to that next slide around healthy learning. In my own experience, whether it was the work at Oracle, whether it was the work at SAS, or my work with Civitas Learning and Gates Foundation, one of the things you see in the data is, if you unpack the data, students don't leave higher ed for the most part because of academic challenges. They leave because of broad psychosocial challenges. They don't know if they belong. They don't know if they're not really on purpose, or because of life and logistics. It's basic needs like housing insecurity, food insecurity, textbook costs, and a host of others. Those are the big reasons students leave. It's one of the reasons why, like, I am so passionate about this notion of a healthy learning environment. And the notion of healthy learning is us leveraging technology, leveraging policy, leveraging practice, leveraging research to figure out how we weave this social emotional learning work together with our work on DEI, with our work on mental health, with our work on basic needs, even with our work on character and ethics education, to create a healthier learning environment. Let me tell you what, there is not a privileged parent on the planet that is not spending a bunch of time thinking about how they make sure their student, their kid, their young adult is going into a healthy learning environment. Maybe not easy, but one where they're psychologically safe and they can rise and thrive. The same thing we need to make sure we're bringing to access environments, community colleges and public institutions that often feel Darwinian And they're not Darwinian based on academics. They're Darwinian based on basic needs, like students who just can't, again, the life and logistics and or whether or not they feel like they belong. And one of the things we're really passionate about is how do we use tools like Yellowdig? How do we use different kinds of learning design strategies, different policies, different practices? At Western Governors University, we've been helping catalyze this conversations with HBCUs, HSIs, public access universities, community colleges around this. In fact, we're holding our big kind of convening around this in February, around this idea of how do you braid your initiatives in SEL, DEI, basic needs, mental health, character education together to create these kind of healthy learning environments. Because that goes back to that purpose thing you were talking about, Shaunak, right? It puts the technology on purpose. It puts the policy change on purpose, the practice on purpose. And it makes you think about that's what you want to lean into to create the kind of environments that students can really be challenged, because the teaching and learning should be challenging, not the bureaucracy, right? Or not trying to navigate the clunky software, right? It's the actual concepts that they're wrestling with. That's what should be the kind of most challenging for these folks.
That's great. And by the way, I just put that framework, Mark, that you've created on the slide. So in terms of, one question that comes to my mind is, from a structure or a framework standpoint, it makes a ton of sense, right? So now how do we go from where we are today, which is the way we see that is, every institution has a variety of initiatives around DEI, around social emotional learning, around character, education in various ways to kind of get them together so that we have a cohesive point of view where education has to go. So where do you see we are in the journey from where we are today to where we want to go? And if you can talk a little bit about what are the steps that you think that we need to take to get into that destination?
Are you asking me or Rob?
To you, Mark.
Okay, yeah. I think, we are absolutely in a learning phase right now. And the great news is things are changing so rapidly that we're all rookies every year. And I think coming out of the pandemic, we're all going to have to take a deep breath and start visioning what's possible around this. And I'm deadly serious about this. I think there's been a lot of really dysfunctional conflation that has gone on where people are conflating digital learning, the 20 years of digital learning practice that has taken place with the emergency remote learning that people had to do. Now, emergency remote learning was important and people busted their tails to make it happen, but a lot of it was pretty challenging. That's very different than the 20 years of unbelievable practice and data we have around how to do high quality learning environments, all the QM work and just a host of others. We've gotten a lot better at doing this kind of work. And the challenge is people are now, I'm seeing this nonsense out there like, oh, we all experienced online learning during the pandemic. We know how terrible it is. We have to get back to normal. It's nonsense. What we know now, by the way, Western Governors grew by double digits during the pandemic because we are good at doing digital learning. We know how to do it. The people who know how to do it well actually, did well during the pandemic side of, and or they survived and thrived in kind of blending their environments. What we need to do is take a deep breath, harvest the data from the people who are really good at this, the pros, and together with the new creativity and the new innovation from people who started using these digital tools for the first time. And by the way, some really rock star stuff, and start visioning, not worry about going back to normal. And I don't like new normal. I think it's too normal. Normal wasn't working for a whole lot of people. We've got to start thinking about a new possible. How do we build out a new, and by the way, this isn't easy. I understand we have to crawl, walk, run. We have to work within our policies and practices to get there. But when you ask where we are, we're in a stage where we have an opportunity, I think, as we start arising from this pandemic, to start really rethinking things. People now realize the access to digital tools are real, that we can make connections between people like never before. And they want to start hybriding and blending this stuff and being thoughtful about it, letting data and conversations help guide what that learning enterprise looks like. And I think we have the chance to change our environment. Let's be blunt. For the last 30 years, we've been continuing to operate based on legacy, an industrial factory model on an agrarian calendar, trying to meet the needs of an information age. And it's been clunky and hard. I think if anything, this kind of forced digital immersion might help us come out and really open our aperture and think differently about how we would vision going forward. It's not going to be simple. We have to work within our funding strategies and our buildings and everything else. But we've got a moment here as educators where we can start visioning something different. Now, different digital tools, but also policy work, practice work, your philosophy around everything from the conversation around going gradeless or leveraging competency. About, if you haven't seen the Open Skills Network is this wonderful dialogue. OSN is this wonderful dialogue between employers and educators about linking learning expectations. That kind of stuff's going to help us just think differently about education. And I think we're at a stage now where we have a chance to do some really fundamental redesign that could be pretty exciting. Now, as we do it, we want to make sure that we weave in this healthy learning environment work. If we redesign it in a healthy way, we can help students be more anti-fragile, more effective, more able to really kind of take on the world. But our access environments should be as healthy as our privileged environments. And that's what we can get passionate around designing and leveraging our technology for.
That's great. Rob, do you have any comments or thoughts on this?
Oh, Mark, I was smiling at a lot of what you said because I couldn't agree more. I'm asked all the time, is online education good? And my response is always, that's like asking, is transportation fast? It kind of depends if you're on a donkey or a plane, right? People didn't experience the kind of great online education that you've built at Western Governors or that I see at Stride, which is one of the largest online K-12 networks. So absolutely, you need to be, when you look at online education, you need to look at the right way to do it. I think you're very optimistic that this reboot we need to do will be successful. I think it's going to be, it'll be quite a challenge because I think we need to rethink every piece of it, because you're right, we're educating now on a foundation that's hundreds of years old. And we need to build it with today's students and today's technologies, and it's a lot of work to get done.
And the forces of reactionary traditionalism are mighty.
Oh my! Turn on the news any day.
So, Rob, one other question comes to my mind is, in this transformation, OPMs, the online program managers, you know that word intimately well. I mean, what's your thought around the role of OPMs or other partners that are working with universities to kind of design online programs?
My reaction when I'm talking about OPMs is not a lot different than when I think about companies like yours, like Yellowdig. Everything had to be local. Your classroom 10 years ago was as good as the teacher standing in front of it. And now with the strength of SaaS and the ability for people to specialize, you can come up with a tool that's going to create an experiential learning environment and put it in every classroom in the country. That's what OPMs do, right? They, instead of each school trying to solve the problems of building online interaction, online marketing, online support, you can have a company like 2U, and clearly we're not the only one out there, but a company like 2U specialize in these tools and then roll them out over 50 or 100 or 200 universities. And that's really the advantage that technology brings today. You can come up and become great at a piece of this, and each school can use a best of breed solution as opposed to try to build their own, which by the nature of the resources and the time is not going to be good as something that's built and deployed over 100 or 200 different schools. So I think OPMs are successful, like Yellowdig will be successful, like Western Governors and Stride are successful, because you can deploy these solutions so broadly, and they have advantage over one school or one teacher trying to build their own solution. Now, it doesn't mean individual teachers can't add to what we know. We need to understand how our tools are being used in the classroom. We need to learn every day. But an example from another company I work with, Trilogy Education, they would teach the same curriculum in 100 different classrooms, and they cared about each student and each teacher, but each teacher would contribute to their knowledge about the course, and then they'd be able to improve it based on what they were seeing in 100 different classrooms. So I care about the teacher and I care about the student and I care about their feedback. But if you can get feedback from thousands of students and hundreds of teachers and then deploy based on what you've learned across the entire solution, you can improve education more quickly. I'm curious what you think, Mark.
No, I think that that's right. I think this is about connecting learning communities. I mean, one of the things, to be honest, one of the things I was most excited about in connecting with Yellowdig was this notion of creating more robust and connected learning communities matters. And it's mattered, we've known in professional development for a long time. Just go if you go to the national training and development seminars for the corporate side, you see this kind of work. But even in our work, the National Institute for Staff and Organizational Development, which is the kind of big professional learning organization in the community college space out of UT Austin, they hold an annual conference every year that is literally a professional development love fest. It is some of the best teachers and learners coming together, talking about how they're doing their work. And then they've extended that digitally with innovation abstracts. They've done it with other kinds of work. And then now they're doing sort of seminars all around the country. But this is a classic example of teachers helping each other get better. Because one of the things, I wrote a book 15 years ago called Practical Magic, which was a study of about 5,000 Teaching Excellence Award winners. And in that, one of the best parts of that book was when we were doing focus groups. And one of the things one of the faculty members told me during one of the focus groups was, you realize the absolute best teachers are purveyors of the case method. I go, what do you mean by the case method? He goes, copy and steal everything, right? Someone else is doing it well. We're going to try to figure out how to bring it in. And that is part of that close connected learning community. And I got to tell you, that's happening even, I do a lot of coaching for youth sports. And what's really powerful now is to see kids who love getting in these learning communities, and they're all helping each other get better in different sports. Like they're literally sharing tips for this and for that. And the amount of information they have at their fingertips, Rob, I don't know how you feel about this, but when I was an athlete growing up, I would have killed for that kind of information. The kind of training and resources they have at their fingertips right now is amazing, because we are creating connected learning communities like never before. So what that does mean, I think, is that we can learn from each other, but then we got to figure out how we bring that into our own learning environments with our students, so we can connect them together and have them model developing learning. We've, Vince Tinto and a host of others have talked about the power of learning communities for years. We've got to get away from the spray and pray teaching and learning model and get into more connected learning. And that's where this stuff can really get powerful. It not only helps content build, the ability to master content, it connects students to each other and helps with SEL. It helps with creating healthier learning environments. There are all kinds of ancillary benefits around this that will help them manage their learning for a lifetime.
One of the things we are finding in our data, by the way, I thought this might be interesting based on what we're discussing, is early on when we used to create and build those communities for individual instructors, right? So one of the big questions used to be, in our platform, we have something called gameful learning practices, where we have a point system where the learners will earn points based on their activities in the platform, and those points will count towards participation grade. But a question we used to get from our instructors is that what kind of weightage I should provide to, let's say, somebody posting a new comment versus somebody reacting to somebody else's post versus somebody bringing in a new idea, for example, a new resource into the discussion, because each of them are different values in terms of kind of student participation. But now, one thing we have done, recently we did a project where we looked at like over hundreds of thousands of these communities, and we ran what we call is a small AI model to see what kind of point system led to the best health of the community. So we have a measure around health of the community in terms of how many interactions, how interactive the community is, how much they're sharing with one another, listening to one another, things like that. And we found that AI model said, okay, this is the best configuration of your gameful learning practices to get the best results. So now when we go to instructors, we say, okay, you know what? Based on all these hundreds of thousands of data points, this is something that you can use to get probably the best results. Now you can customize from there, but at least we can give you something. This is a good starting point based on a lot of data points. So I think to your point, one thing that we see is, I think if there is more collaboration around sharing of data, and I know there are some challenges around sharing of data. For example, we sometimes share best practices, but not exactly the data from various institutions. But more we can share with one another around where the where the success is coming from, I think we are going to leapfrog some of these kind of design questions that we may have as we kind of move forward.
And by the way, the students want their data. It's their data. They actually want their data, and they want to be able to make better choices based on their data. Faculty, I often say that many faculty in higher ed today, and Rob, I'd love to get your take on this. We have amazingly capable faculty members, incredibly well-trained. They're often, I feel like they're like battlefield surgeons, incredibly educated, talented people in low information environments who never see the results of their work, right? So if we can get them plugged into an environment where they get better information, there's not a doctor on the planet that would not want to chart before they see a patient. Not to mention, they want to see what happens with that patient in the long run. Like, if we can get more information to our professionals and not infantilize them, allow them to be learning professionals with those students, great things can happen. If we can get more data to the students so they feel, so they're less dependent and they can become more independent learners and have them iterate it, right? Part of gamification is that kind of iteration. And then we can create more learning communities where people learn from each other. I mean, Rob, I think part of the power of 2U was when you started it was getting to some kind of base practices that more people could begin to adopt, so people can kind of scale these opportunities. So they didn't have to invent it from scratch, right?
We have data that, as we were getting, frankly, we didn't know how powerful it would be. We now know by looking at the type of student coming to you, a type of student coming into a type of program, which students are likely to struggle in which classes. And we don't have to wait for them to struggle to be able to help them, right? And some of it, in hindsight's pretty easy. If you have someone with a 20-year gap of education going into a course that it requires a lot of writing skills and they haven't written an essay in 20 years, they're going to struggle. And once we identified that, we took those students, gave them writing help before they failed. And you know what happened? They never failed. You went from 20% of the students heading towards failure of their first hard course to none of those students failing because you solved the problem before it was even there. And that's what data allows you to do.
Yeah. It's going to get, I mean, again, we have the opportunity to do some pretty exciting and interesting things as we vision kind of what this new possible is. But Rob is he and I both have the weathered experience of having gone through this innovation work. There's a lot of crazy hyperbole about how different everything is going to be that happens in this space. This work takes focused effort, takes policy change, takes practice change, and it takes a crawl, walk, run strategy to get to scale. I have all the reality therapy in the world on that. I'm still optimistic. I began my work in this world of technology and education. And Rob, you remember this back in the early 1990s, convincing faculty it was going to be okay to use email. And now the only people who use email are faculty, right? And then it was like in the mid 1990s, it was helping educators have a conversation that the internet is a thing. You're really going to use this thing called the internet, right? And then it was in the early 2000s, LMSs are here and they're going to be a mission critical part of your infrastructure. And then in the late 2000s, it was the beginning of data and the notion that, hey, we can unpack this data and actually begin to do things differently. There's always the next thing we're moving into, but it's amazing how it becomes normal, right? Because now everyone uses the LMS, everybody uses data, everybody, like it's become normal. Like what's going to be normal next? And you know what's going to be normal next? Deeper interactivity with our students, engagement and connection with each other. We're going to see AR and VR. We're going to see all kinds of interesting things that are going to become normal. And I love watching it happen, but it's far from easy.
Mark, one of the things I'm most excited about right now, because I think this is the moment now that we're returning or have returned from the pandemic, it's not the kind of very good online education that 2U and Western Governors and Southern New Hampshire does. It's the traditional educational experience, the traditional college experience, and how courses are going to be rebuilt and rethought using the digital tools. So it's the digitization of the real learning. And that's why, frankly, I'm an advisor to Yellowdig, because it can certainly support the kind of online education, the kind of education that online schools do. But I think these kinds of tools that build communities, that help improve education, are just as necessary to help the traditional in-person education. Frankly, tools there are almost more nascent than they are in places that do it very well, like Stride and like Western governors.
And I could not agree more. I think anybody who's in the better than business is fighting a lost cause. This is not about this model being better than that model. I've seen amazing in-person faculty members who have been personally transformational for my own life. I've seen amazing online who have been inspirational and engaging, and then hybrid folks who are off the chain, unbelievable at what they do. I've also seen tragedy in all three of those environments.
Yeah.
Like tragically bad people where students have said, I would not wish that faculty member on my worst enemy, right? So you can be good in all those environments, but it has to do with who the teacher is. It has to do with the instructional design. It has to do with the tools you're leveraging and how you're pulling it together. And all that is about, here's who my learner is, here's what we want them to learn. And now let's use all the tools at my disposal, whatever the tools, technology, and techniques I'm using in that moment, but to help that learning take off. That's what we're trying to get to here. And again, the good news is the tool suite is getting broader. We're able to use more tools to be able to hit that mark. And the great thing about the conversation we're having today is it's not tool specific. This is about the goal of helping students not just master content, but develop broader skills around social emotional learning. It's their understanding of their purpose. I think the core of SEL is they get in touch with their purpose. Why are you even on this learning journey, and what do you want to do? They learn to be in touch with their own feelings and connections about this learning. They learn how to connect with other people on the journey and engage it over time. And that social, emotional, and experiential learning, it just deepens and enriches. Ironically, Rob, that's what people, when they talked about going to college, that's what they meant. It was that deep, rich journey, right, that people went on. But now our definition of college is so much broader because people are now going to college while they're working. Right? They're working and going to school. They're doing it all different kinds of models. And we don't have this kind of like, primarily privileged, college model. We have a much more access oriented, which means we have to innovate in kind of broader ways.
Great. I mean, amazing feedback. I'm looking at time, by the way, it feels like time just flew through right now. We only have 7 minutes left in the webinar, just heads up. So there's one last topic I do want to get through before we kind of close it off, which is around funding innovation. And the reason I bring it up is because, as an EdTech entrepreneur and many other entrepreneurs who are building technologies in this space, one of the challenges is, of course, to finding the money to be able to support and build technologies so that we know that there are a lot of constraints in this space, including budget cuts, and we are living through a pandemic and many other things. So I would love, Rob, for you to kind of talk about funding innovation for the next 5 minutes. And there is a slide around it. I'm just going to the next slide, but if you can just kind of talk through that in terms of your experience in this area.
I was going to interrupt you and say, hey, can I talk about money? Because I'm here as the business guy. The very simple answer, and I'm going to go through this more quickly than I intended because there might be some questions out there we should answer. But the simple answer is there's money, there's academic money, there's federal money throwing through, there's the default answer, which is we'll just have the students pay for it. And the truth is those answers do to some extent work when you're trying to pay for learning innovation. But I think in some ways that's short-sighted. When I think about the metrics around experiential education, yes, it drives better learning. And I actually think that better learning is measurable. But it's not only measurable through course results, it's measurable through retention. And retention to me is a very important concept because while we all aspire to educate students as best we can, the folks who control the money at universities know the dirty little secret. That is, you're not paid when students get higher grades, you're paid when students don't drop out. You're paid when students retain. So any improvement to education, whether it's Yellowdig or any other tool, that gets students more seated in their educational journey, that allows them to retain, it is actually a tool that doesn't cost you any money. It's a tool that pays for itself. And one of the funding methods for many technological solutions is you can pilot them. You can try them in one classroom. You might have 7 classrooms teaching freshman English or freshman calculus, whatever it is, freshman algebra. You can deploy a solution in 1 or 2 classrooms, be able to prove that the students who use that solution stay on as students longer. And that pays the university. And I believe in that model, solutions that increase engagement, that increase retention, actually, I could say save the university money, but they make the university money. And then the question isn't how much are we going to pay on this for this tool? It's how much are we going to invest in this tool that will actually pay us in the end. So I think it's a very, very different way of thinking about it. And for tools that really engage students and really keep them on for longer, it's the right way to think about it. Even more broadly, tools that create community should be able to increase yield. Students who are admitted that commit to the university. It should be able to decrease melt. Students who commit to the university don't actually show up, because as you're part of a community, you're so much less likely to leave it and disappear. So if we can deploy these tools that create experiences, that create engagement as early in a student's journey as possible, I literally think those tools will increase our rates of graduation, which means the schools get more money and the cost of technology, well, they're not costs, they're investments that pay the university back in actual cash.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's kind of what.
Rob, I'd love to get your take on something real quick, or Shaunak,
Yeah.
if I jump in, just that I'm increasingly passionate about the idea. In fact, we're doing it our own work in our college, at College of Education at WGU, is ensuring that our leadership teams are grounded in the financial principles, the data capacity, and the learning goals. Because I feel like if you have all 3 of those, you really understand the learning goals you're going after and the learning strategies you want to leverage. You really understand the financial, your revenues, your expenses, the business modeling, and you really understand the data, especially the student progression data, that we call it the hero journey of our students. Those 3 things together give you the ability to innovate and scale in a way that's sustainable, right? You can create a sustainability strategy, but we often don't challenge our leaders to develop all 3 of those skill sets. And I think more and more, we're going to have the expectation, if we really want to get good quality learning-centered innovation that is financially grounded and data informed, like that's where the real potential is here. But we've got to get all three legs of that stool standing before we can get this stuff working.
It's always been a key part of my leadership. I know Shaunak believes that. We talked about this a couple of days ago. Everyone who works for the company has to use the product. He wants to use his product to get all the students involved. I think as an educational leader, and in this case, I mean provost, CEO, I think you need to create goals that don't allow silos in your organization. The teachers have to care about the cost of education, and the bean counters, and I can say that because I'm a bean counter, need to care about the educational goals as well, which I always have. And if you don't do that, then everyone's going to talk past each other. You're going to get to a meeting where you're trying to decide what to do next. And of course, no one's going to agree because you don't have the same set of goals, right? You need these shared goals, which means shared information and shared metrics.
Yeah. Shaunak, I know we're at the end. I just want to say thank you so much for letting us be a part and helping stir the pot here. There's so much good work to do in this area. And you got to feel good about helping catalyze this by creating a tool that really stirs things up in the education space.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you very much. Thanks for this really engaging conversation. I truly learned a lot myself.
Let me talk over you for a second. I'm going to ask the moderator because I'm not great at interacting with the chat bot. If someone could just share my email, I'm glad if people want to reach out to me directly as well.
Yes. So we'll take care of that. And Mark, we are going to include your contact information as well, if that's okay. And looking at time, I just wanted to kind of give a couple of quick shout outs to whoever is still on. I'm going to pass on a few slides. We have a fantastic webinar. There are a couple of webinars coming up. We have one tomorrow by UC Davis and Clark Atlanta University. Both of them have been using Yellowdig for a while, and they're going to share their experiences with you. So if you are interested to see the platform in action and hear from some of our users, please scan the code on the left side. So if you just put your screen, take your camera on, you might be able to see the link. And if you're interested, if you don't get the link, just reach out to us. So we have an exciting webinar tomorrow. So that's that. And the other one is we have a demo webinar coming up, shortly next month, which is 14th of December. In this webinar, we are going to show you the tool a lot more in detail and kind of show you various features and functionality to drive that social engaged learning in your classrooms and programs. So do scan that if you're interested in that. And finally, the last shout out is we do have a free pilot program. So for instructors who are interested in using our technology for the first time, we allow various institutions to use us completely free of cost. And we have a winter pilot cohort starting pretty soon. So we have a few spots left. So if you're interested, please scan this code again or reach out to us through our website. We would love to get you on board. So with that, again, thanks a lot, Mark and Rob. I truly enjoyed the conversation. Hope everybody got a ton of value. We are going to share this recorded webinar with all the people who signed up for this so that you're going to see a recording as well. And if you haven't got to any of your questions in the chat, I saw there was quite a few. We are going to email you and make sure that your questions are answered. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaunak.